Hi guys, my name is Taylor Watkins, and I am obviously one of your classmates, but I am the discussion leader for this week. I volunteered to be the discussion leader because I took a class last semester with Dr. Kilfoyle, and I was already kind of familiar with how the discussion leader role was supposed to work. So, yeah, that's why I volunteered. What I did for this week's assignment is I went through the chapters or assigned reading, and I picked out the pieces that stood out to me the most and the things that I understood. And from those pieces, I also developed two questions that I think could be really useful in starting the discussion. So first, I want to go ahead and start with what I found in chapter 1. Basically, the purpose of this study is to explore and analyze an aspect of the English language, increase your understanding of how the language as a whole works, and understand how the English language got to be the way it is. So that kind of helped me develop a better understanding of what I was reading, like the purpose of why I was reading this and what I wanted to get out of the text. Throughout the text, there was also a lot of words and phrases that stood out to me, and it helped me come to certain conclusions. One of the phrases or words that I found was metathesis, and it's a systematic process of sound change, and it involves the reversal or switching places of two sounds. The example that the author used was ask and axe. So that it popped up the question, like, how do you know which is really correct, like, and how did they come to the conclusion which it was correct? So this also showed how language changes over time, and how, like I previously stated, that we view words as right and wrong. Language is used to accomplish things, act as a social link, and it kind of composes who we are as human beings. So, there's a little section in the text called The Power of Language. It stresses the idea that language is powerful. They use the example of name calling to kind of emphasize that it's not just language, and that your words do have consequences and meaning, and that the authors also stated that you can judge by ear, which also kind of shows that you can learn more about a person, including their culture and where they're from, also what social status they have and what groups they belong to, just by the language that they use. Human language is a conventional system of signs that allows for the creative communication of meaning. Within that, language has signifiers and signifieds, and those two, when they come together, they create signs. The sign is the meaningful word. The signifier is the linguistic form or the string of sounds that the word is composed of. And then the signified is the concept of which the signifier refers. And so altogether that creates a meaningful word. Throughout history, there are many linguists. One of the famous linguists that were mentioned in the text was Saussure, and he stressed that the signified and signifiers are arbitrary, meaning that there's no direct relationship between the sound of a word and its meaning, but the relationship of the linguist's signs to each other is systematic. So separately they don't have meaning, but once they come together they do. Let me see what else. I've got a lot of notes. Another term that popped up was grammar. It's just structure and rules governing a language at the level of sound, word formation, syntax, and semantics. Linguistics is also a very important word because we are studying language and linguistics. It's the principled study of language as a system. And within linguistics, there are subdisciplines, including phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. So phonology is sound systems and sound change. Morphology is how the words form. Syntax is the structure of phrases, clauses, and sentences, and then semantics is just the study of the meanings. So another little section within the text is human language versus animal communication, and basically it just talks about how there are biological capabilities of humans compared to animals, how animals communicate in different ways, and how it kind of puts more of a stress of the importance on your language and like how you convey what you're saying and how it has a meaning. So let me goes back to the process of changing language. Oh yeah. Sorry, I was a little lost for a second. But going back to the process of ever-changing language, there are internal factors because language is constantly changing. The internal factors are inherent to structure, especially the sound structure of the language. There are social factors, and they depend on the behavior of the speech communities. And there are cognitive factors, and those that depend on our comprehension of the language and on our mind's language processes. In a book about language change, Jean Acheson, I'm not too sure how to pronounce that. Sorry about that. They raise the question, is all this change progress or decay? Referring to the ever-changing language that humans use. That's one of the questions that I want us to use as our discussion this week. And I'll go ahead and reiterate this at the very end just so you don't have to write this down or something a little less complicated. But so I want everyone to kind of consider, do you think that the ever-changing language is progress, or do you think it's kind of hindering the progress that was already made when creating language and linguistics and how we communicate? Let me see. On the bottom of page 23 in the textbook, got mine. It says, because human language is infinitely creative, speakers are constantly using words in new combinations and with slightly, if not radically, new meanings. If other speakers start to use the words in this new way, they can create new conventional meanings or uses. In other words, if enough speakers adopt a new meaning or construction, it becomes a conventional, accepted part of the day-to-day language. So, yeah, it says, as more and more speakers have adopted the word as a verb, Google, this use has become a conventional part of the language. So that was just kind of, Google is kind of like a word that, obviously we all know what Google is, the search tool, but it's something that's been used so often that it's just part of our everyday language. So it's kind of and it's just like slang as well. It's just, and I've said this a million times, I'm just going to repeat myself. Do you think that the constant changes in language and linguistics, do you think that is helpful or harmful? So, in summary, for the first chapter, language is the primary means by which we communicate, obviously. The human language consists of systems and signs, and all languages are constantly changing. So that's all I had to address for Chapter 1. In Chapter 2, since it was kind of a longer reading assignment, I got notes as well. So Chapter 2 addresses language and authority, and the author poses the question of who makes decisions about what is standard. There's two authors actually. They addressed the word blog in a game of Scrabble. The grandma didn't understand what a blog was, but how could the other person playing Scrabble decide if they could get points for that word or not? Obviously the grandma didn't understand that the word blog was a word because language had changed and it's not a word she was familiar with, but it was a word, and it was just to the younger person playing, but that's due to the constant changing language that they understood that. So it also goes back and kind of addresses the issue of what is right and wrong in the English language, what could be considered right and wrong. So one thing that was addressed in this chapter was who's in control. There's never been been a successful academy to govern the English language, like who's like a committee or something basically to decide what is right and wrong. People realized after publishing many editions of the dictionary that English would constantly change despite efforts to keep it stable and constant. So there was no reason to believe that the change was good nor bad. Our English language is now governed by what the authors referred to as language mavens. Those are people like teachers, editors, journalists, columnists, just writers, specifically authors of like grammar textbooks and stuff like that. They're all really credible sources, and it's just kind of who we seem to believe is more fitting and reliable for situations like that. It also addressed defining standard English. It's really they described it as a fuzzy concept, and it's even considered a myth. It's not associated with a particular locality, and the network of authorities aren't always on the same page. So it's kind of really hard to clearly define what standard English is. The Oxford Companion to the English Language states that in everyday usage, standard English is to be taken to be the variety most widely accepted and understood within an English-speaking country or throughout the English-speaking world. So it's just basically what most people use is what most people tend to believe as the English standard, or standard English, same difference. Standard English is also most often associated with formal speech and writing. Another topic that this chapter addresses, or the authors address in this chapter, are descriptive versus prescriptive grammar rules. Descriptive rules are attempted to model the speaker's linguistic competence and performance, and it's what speakers know about a language and how they use it. And then the prescriptive grammar rules, they establish and enforce what we should say or write according to established notions of good and bad or right and wrong. These rules try to enforce a single formal norm. Descriptive rules they're kind of like informal, and they're not usually in books because they're just understood at a young age. Like prescriptive rules are more often featured in like grammar books, and descriptive are just in dictionaries, just things that you understand. Let me see. So some examples of prescriptive rules, if I could speak, they're like ain't, who, and whom, and like multiple negatives, like double negatives within a sentence, just things like that. The grammar and style are also two concepts within the use of language. So those are two other factors to consider. It's easier to control written language than spoken language for obvious reasons. But written and like formal standard English is basically social construction. Like there's just a lot of made up rules, and it's just what basically as a society, it's what we have decided to go along with and what we believe is right. So the another little section in this chapter are the dictionaries of English. They're relatively new due to the advanced age of English only being around for about 250 years, and that was in 2012 when this text was published. So it's been even longer than that. But now the most commonly used text like dictionary is Webster's Dictionary, and it was originally created for linguistic independence from Great Britain. And I'm an English major, so sorry for all the other English majors. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of history in this. But another little piece of history that was involved is corpus linguistics. Corpus is basically just large electronic text databases used to search in order to examine language in use. And now that is used as the systematic empirical study of language based on real-life examples of language use, written and spoken. It's basically like a database, and it's just to have a more thorough understanding of language and linguistics. And it's because it's in a database online, like it's really descriptive and thorough and easy to understand. And you can find a lot more information that way. From this chapter, the second question that I wanted us to consider is how would you, as an individual, define standard English? So, yeah, I mean, those are the main points that I've gotten from these two chapters. I hope this little video wasn't too long and too awful to get through. So just to reiterate, the two questions that I have to help start a discussion this week are how would you define standard English? And do you believe that the ever-changing language and linguistics that we use, is it a sign of progress or decay? So thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this. And yeah, I can't wait to read all the comments that you guys leave down below.